Welcome to Ask Andrew. I'm Andrew Ledette, husband, musician, podcaster, and idea factory. On today's show, we welcome Federico Maffini to share wisdom about his adventures in program management. In addition to being a fellow number lover, he's the global head of worldwide business operations and programs at AWS. After a decade at Amazon and AWS, he published a book to help others. A link to his book and his bio are in today's show description. We cover three big topics today. Why raising your hand for projects is important. Second, how to identify and structure a project. And third, how to define the success of a project. Along the way, we chat about how saying yes to something he never wanted to do early in his career changed the rest of his life. We hit on some great career advice about horizontal versus vertical moves and the power of curiosity. I hope you enjoy this discussion with Fed as much as I did. If you would like to share what you've learned in your career and be a guest on Ask Andrew, drop me a note. Love to chat with you. All right, here we go. Here's the show. Welcome to Ask Andrew. I'm Andrew Ledette, and I'm excited to have a guest with us today. Federico Maffini is our special guest, and we're going to talk about product and program management. So a couple of things as we introduce Fed, and you can find all of his information in the show notes. Some key bits. He left Italy to finish university in the Netherlands, and then that led to an internship with Amazon. And there's probably an ellipse in there, Fed, of all the different things that happened to get to this point. But beyond your bio, which we'll have linked up, let's jump into some quick bits for people to get to know you a little bit better. One of the prompts I love the most is finishing this question. If you really knew me, you'd know blank. So for our listeners, if they really knew you, what would they know about you?
That I love good wine, good watches, good podcasts. I think that's probably the easiest way to finish that sentence.
Well, my hope today is that we can hit on that third one, that we can hopefully deliver a good podcast today. Unless people are listening with a glass of wine, looking at a nice timepiece. Then 3 out of 3. And then this one I thought would just be a little more fun too, as a fellow data lover. So we met years ago through the Amazon process, and we connected on our shared love of metrics, dashboards, data, tinkering. And so with that, some of these questions will be biased in that way. But I would love to know what your favorite formula is in Excel or SQL, because I know you're a SQL aficionado, according to you.
For sure. Well, Excel, I've been using Excel for a decade now. I think I've tried almost every formula there is, but the most versatile and the most powerful to me still remains index match. As long as you know how to do it, it's my go-to, a lot better than any sort of VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, all sorts of things. You can literally do 90% of the modeling in Excel with just index match. So if you don't know it, go research it. It will change your life.
And then bonus content, which I'll link to as well. You led a YouTube webinar. Well, it wasn't for YouTube, but it's on YouTube, where you show how to use ChatGPT. If Excel formulas are a newer struggle for you, I'll link to that too. It's a powerful 90 minutes for people that are like, what? I don't know what index match is. Having a person guide you through how the bot can help you through. All right. And so that's your favorite formula. That's a super powerful one. Door number 2, fast 4, favorite chart type. So you're displaying this information that you have this powerful table. Is there a go-to you have for a type of visual?
I will disappoint you, because to me, the best chart type is actually a table.
Whoa.
If I could abolish all the charts, I probably would. People that don't understand that is just that they haven't sort of gotten their heads around how to read and interpret data at scale. And so naturally you tend to shy away from tables because they look intimidating, but tables can allow you to fit something for everyone, right? So you still need to be specific and sort of intentional with what you do, but tables are a lot more detailed oriented, less up for interpretation, more comprehensive. If that doesn't work, I will still go for a really nice, simple line chart.
Good to know. The hot take first here, abolish all charts. So
yes.
for your next presentation that you're pouring over the details, just kill the charts. So that's
kill the charts.
Kill them all. Alternate topic. Oh, I didn't mention it all. This is bad on me, podcast host. So I intended to include in your bio. Big change for you, recent author. So that was the other part of your intro, is that you recently wrote the book or a book on
Yeah,
product and program management. So that's another reason why we're chatting today. So I neglected on that
sure.
in my notes. All right, quick number three, thing you wished you learned earlier in your career.
Oh, nice. I'll give you two. Can I give you two?
Please.
One is that you should always ask your dumb questions, the ones you think they're dumb, as early on as possible. A, they're never
Mm.
dumb. Two, the biggest problem is that if you wait, it becomes like it becomes so late that you can no longer ask those questions, right? So don't miss the opportunities to ask those questions at the start, whether you're changing a job, meeting new people, embarking on a new project, doesn't matter. Just ask them early on. It's almost like asking someone's name like 5 minutes after you've talked to them, right? Exactly that. So don't do that.
Yeah,
The
it could be
second
2 years
one,
later, you don't know their name, and then you ask, and it's like, oh,
exactly,
you've never knew my name. Nope.
exactly. Weird. So if you come across an acronym, just ask what that means right away.
Yeah.
The second one, a bit more specific to Amazon, but I'm pretty sure it would apply to many big companies out there. Move horizontally within the company as much as you can, as often
Mm.
as you can, because that is the best way to learn something new. So
Mm.
often we fall in the trap of chasing a promotion. Obviously, that comes with tenure and we're staying in the same role for a while. Um, I would argue against that, especially early in your career. It's actually a lot more beneficial to move around and go see things elsewhere, go do things for another manager, another team, for another product, and just sort of learn that way. Most
Mm.
valuable thing you can do.
Yeah, it's fantastic advice because I think, especially what I've seen in my career, there's a desire of, hey, I have to go up.
Yeah,
Seldom would someone say, there's more caution usually of, hey, don't go lateral. Why would you go sideways? But I think what I hear from you too is, hey, you can learn
100%.
a different leadership style. You can learn different intricacies without added responsibility in going up of maybe now you
Yeah,
manage more people or more complexities. Yeah, that's great advice.
yeah.
Uh,
And
thanks for that.
and just one thing, Andrew. Like if you put it in perspective, right? Most of us will work for many decades to come. Like unless you win the lottery, you'll likely end up working for many years, right? So what does that do? Like delaying your promotion by a couple of years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, even. It doesn't do anything. Like you will still get there, but the amount of a sort of knowledge that you can compile and compound in that time frame will accelerate your career growth a lot more than what you could have achieved by staying in the same place. So it's
Mm,
you need to play the long term, obviously, but yeah, there's literally no cost to moving horizontally, in my opinion, at least.
yeah,
It's only benefit. So
yeah, that's fantastic. And I think the other idea too of being a sponge and constantly being
yeah,
curious versus thinking, oh, I know everything here. I should ascend and then tell other people how to run their team, whatever it might be. Yeah. And then I think you shared with me a thing that has stayed with me all these years, that component, which is a very big Amazon thing of the day one culture.
mm-hmm.
So that approaching things as if they are new. Instead of, oh, I know everything here, we get complacent or we rule things out when we're testing, which I think we're going to get to in a little bit.
Yeah,
So that reminded me too of what you shared with me years ago. So
for
that's
sure.
helpful. And then our last one, hopefully you touched on it a little bit. What brings you joy as we wound up people getting to know
Ooh,
you a little bit?
Uh, many things. Well, the things I said earlier, definitely good wine, good watches, and good podcasts, but there's definitely more to it. One of the things that I think genuinely gives me a lot of fulfillment is the ability to give back, whether it's mentoring or coaching others. Like I'm really big on mentoring. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you probably will have seen that, but if you don't, like I love helping others with everything I've learned during the years. Like, and that's the only reason why I wrote the book that I wrote was basically that, right? Pack everything that I was so lucky to learn from many good leaders around me into something that anyone can benefit from. So to me, what gives me joy is the ability to mentor and coach others and give back 100%.
Love it. Yeah. And if you don't follow Fed already, I'll put the link in there too. So now you're hopefully exponential growth, so you can
Yeah,
continue expanding that wisdoms and helping other people and forwarding those things out because that's a snowball. which will help more people get help and move further. Thanks for sharing those pieces. I think I know you better now through you sharing those, so thank you for that. So let's dig in a little bit now. So our topic for today is program management. And so your career, you've done a bunch of different roles across Amazon.
Yeah.
One of the things I failed to tell you is I own a time machine, Fed. So in this time machine, we can transport back to your early days at Amazon, fresh off your internship, and thinking about those early programs or projects that you were a part of. So if we go back to that time, so I think you shared it was like the early 2010s or mid 2010s, and detail a little bit of maybe one of those early ones that you put your hand up or someone maybe said, hey, we'd love for you to share your ideas on this. And just kind of maybe like 1 minute of like, give a little sketch of what that was like when you were first doing that project or that program.
So it's funny you ask, because actually my career started in finance, which was the only thing I didn't want to do coming out of uni. Like I had a really deep and entrenched hate for anything to do with numbers, because, school never really taught me to love numbers, to use numbers. And my brain really never really computed or appreciated numbers that way. And so, but as I told many times, like coming out of uni, it was Amazon, it was an internship in finance. I couldn't really turn that down, right? So I went for it, decided to take the leap, and I'm so glad I did, because the finance I ended up doing really had nothing to do with the finance that was being taught at school, right? So, and that goes back to your question earlier, like you need to go for those sort of big leap of faith especially early in your career, where you can still change trajectory and come back and sort of revisit. But that was by far the best thing that could happen to me. That said, I then continued on a 5-year career stint in finance, knowing that I never really would have wanted to continue to do finance forever. But, things happen, like I was enjoying it. I was actually taking on new projects. I was getting promoted. And that's where my biggest regret actually comes from, which was from not moving earlier. I grew fast, but like in hindsight, I could have learned so much more by taking a bit of a slower path. What I wanted to say is that even though I was in finance, I always found opportunities to do the things that actually made me excited and sort of made me going, which were at the time really projects or initiatives that were spanning a bit beyond the remit of finance. And at the time, I didn't know that was what I wanted to do. It was just giving me joy. It was giving me something else to get stuck into. And so I would raise my hand for literally anything that I could sort of volunteer for. And one of the biggest projects we did at the time had to do with sort of revisiting the way we were costing or treating items on retail, so on .com, right? On Amazon.com, whenever you go shop online, there were items that would sell below a certain average selling price. So say below $10, £10, whatever, that weren't always profitable, weren't always handled correctly from a fulfillment standpoint, operational standpoint. And so that became a massive project that then I had to hand off, right? Because it wasn't my lane necessarily, or it wasn't really for me to own and to see through. But that was something that I initiated, and something after picking up on one of those metrics that we saw in one of the tables that always circle around at Amazon, WVRs and MPRs and whatnot, and sort of, plucking out, from that number and working backwards from what I thought the problem could have been, turned out to be a several month long project. And ultimately, when I ended that off to someone else for them to see it through the finishing line, that really made me realize that finance was not really the place for me. And that's when I started to look for jobs elsewhere. But I think like the silver lining in there, or the sort of the bottom line is, that's what I appreciate of program management specifically, which is the ability not just to see problems, but to see the problems through to resolution, ideally. And we can talk more about that, but that's definitely one of the early learns.
Yeah, thanks for that. Because I think one of the things for the people that are earlier in their career listening now, whether they've been working for 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
or they've recently started at a new company. There's a great book about the first 90 days that is helpful, even if you're
Mm-hmm.
not in your first 90 days. How do you very similarly take a passion there? Oh man, I didn't even know it was there. All right, I'm gonna guess another book on your shelf based on some of your writings. Like I think we're reading the same books, which maybe I need to differentiate what I read a little bit there too. But anyway, that component of how do you approach things as a beginner. So even if you're not new
Mm.
in your current job, maybe you have a new manager, whatever that might be. I think one of the things that I took from your book and my own career, and I think your career as well, is that that invitation that a program or project or a curiosity has, maybe not on career growth or career
Mm-hmm.
opportunities, but fulfillment through joy. Of if you
Yeah.
are doing things that excite you, that keep your mind moving, that can make it more fulfilling in what you do every day. Because we spend a lot of our times in our
Yeah.
work until you said like we hit the lotto. Then we go get a vineyard, go get a watch
Yeah.
and several watches.
Exactly.
Although if you're retired, you might not need to watch too much to count time. Maybe not. Maybe it's just an hour hand, no minutes.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think with that transition a little bit, let's dig in of if that's the why behind program management, of putting your hand up,
Mm-hmm.
finding opportunities. Your book talks about this as well, of being curious of how do you find a project that you're curious about. And I think that might be the first question. Like, well, what do you think is off if it's a high metric in an all hands or town hall, whatever your
Mm-hmm.
company meeting is, whatever those key metrics are, that maybe it's sideways or it's going down or it's not
Yeah.
as growing as fast. That might start that inquisitive mind of, well, what do I know that I might have
Yeah.
an impact on, or what am I curious about? What do I not know about? Maybe there's another team, but usually recommending just start local. What is the
Yeah.
sphere? What is your the blocks around your
Oh.
house in the corporate
Mm-hmm.
life? So talk a little bit about that of maybe how you might guide someone
Sure.
to find that project early on, and then we can talk about how do you build that project with rigor, which I know
Sure.
is a big thing for you.
So if you want to start from a purely analytical standpoint, which I think like it's actually probably easier, right? Because it gives you like something very concrete and structured to work off of. From an analytical standpoint, as you say, the first thing I would do is look at all the metrics that we can possibly find before us, right? Whatever team we are in, whatever organization, there will be metrics. Now, metrics are not enough. Like a number doesn't mean anything unless you put it in context, right? And you give it some perspective. So, for instance, you will look at a revenue top line number, right? That's an easy one. So you see the number go up, you see the number go down, but like it doesn't necessarily tell you a whole lot, right? What is the goal, for instance, will give you a lot more to work off of. If the number is going up, like your revenue number is going up, but you're still 50% behind goal, probably that increase doesn't really cut it, right?
Yeah.
Unless it's something significant. So maybe that's not the best place you want to start digging further into. Or maybe it is, like, depends.
Yeah.
But hopefully you understand what I mean. Like, find something that jumps out, either positively or negatively against the benchmark. No,
Mm.
if you don't have a benchmark, if you don't have goals, that's your first project. Be the person that instills or crystallizes goals for your organization, and everyone else will benefit off of that. Now, assuming that's not the case, find your metrics. But again, oftentimes especially when you start to dive deep into a metric, you very quickly forget the bigger picture. And so, especially if you're earlier on in your career, potentially at a more junior level, it's obviously harder for you to have a really complete bigger picture, right? That's something that allows you to put everything in perspective and sort of understand where your priorities genuinely are. So always work with someone that can give you that guidance. Can be your manager, can be other peers, right? Or other stakeholders. It actually doesn't matter. But find the metric first. Find an outlier, not just a metric. So find an outlier, positive or negative, and then go talk to people, right? So these, to me, are the three steps. You talk to people, test your understanding, go in obviously with all the most positive ignorance that you can possibly have, right? You're just asking questions. As I said, ask the dumb ones early on. That usually helps, but there are no dumb questions really. But just sort of go figure things out. Once you've understood that there actually might be a problem somewhere worth picking up, say, for instance, I will give you a random example. Say you have a metric on revenue, you do some deep dive, you figure out that the problem is actually with customer retention. Your customers are dropping off faster than you can acquire them, right? That seems to be a problem. Fine, you've done deep, you've got your problem statement. Then what? Now, this is where like you really can make the difference between a good program manager or project manager and a bad one. And not so much the person, like it's more like a properly managed program or a poorly managed project, right? So once you have your problem statement, you need to take time to set things up properly, which means don't ever jump into solutioning, even though the people you talk to might have already given you some solutions. Oh yeah, like you need to go tweak that, whatever policy, that customer support thing, whatever. That's not what you should do actually, because A, you don't know enough. If the premise is correct, right? You're new, you figure things out, you're taking on something outside your remit. And B, you want to make sure that you don't set yourself up for failure. So you take time, set things up properly. That's when the project management, the zero BS blueprint that I so much talk about in the book might come handy. But there are certain steps that you can go through to really structure things and make sure then that the program that you build or the project that you embark as a charter, as mechanisms, success criteria, and we can dig further into those, Andrew, if you want, but sort of take time to build it out. And once it's built out, you embark on a journey and get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So repeating back some of those, and I think that first step is that curiosity piece and talking to people. That's, I think, something I'm guilty of this. I want to speak proudly. I have been guilty of this in my career of, I'm curious about something or I see something that I think is broken. And then I would go rogue. I'd be like, all right, let me one person fix this. And what I took from your book and many business books is going alone, you might get some stuff done, but you can get a lot more in partnership with other people. And your book talks about that too, of how do you find allies? And there's a fantastic part of how do you keep people looped in, which just touched briefly on that. But that component of you can do some things by yourself, no matter how great you are or not great you are at your job or whatever your capabilities are. In large, even medium-sized companies or small-sized companies, unless it is your own business, there is a huge component that is talking to other people, learning their perspective, and then also trying to invite them in. Is that a problem that they also see? Maybe not that they own to fix, but that they have a stance or they have an opinion on why they think X is Y or whatever it is. And so from there, that invitation to other people, talking to other people beyond just doing it in a vacuum of, hey, one of the things we touched on earlier, why is it important to put your hand up or own some of these projects or programs? Hey, it helps your fulfillment. It also could help your career, but you might shoot yourself in the foot if you say, like, I'm going to own this project myself. I'm going to take that on in addition to my full-time work. And I didn't have the rigor to set this up for success. And it fails because I didn't have the full buy-in from other people. I didn't have the full picture by talking to other people. So really impactful guidance there, even in that first step of just talking to other people, being curious and knowing what other people do and asking those dumb questions, as you call them, of like, hey, what is it you do? What do you see that could be improved? And then starting from there to find those outliers, maybe in a table, maybe in a chart, maybe could be in a table. That sort function, really helpful, just in a table. And then probably that step through would be find that helper, find that partner, as we recap those 3 steps. Super helpful. All right, so let's move next. So let's say you find this outlier, you've talked to people, you've identified whether it's revenue, whatever the thing is that's piquing your curiosity. And now you're starting to draft up that problem statement, and you have a great piece too, like, hey, here's the rubric, here's the template, and it has great extra bits in the back. If you want, I forget if you had, I might have been privy to the Word doc template, but I'm sure other people could ask you for it if they really wanted it. here's the starting spot. And there are great templates too of project outline. Go off. Just here's my hypothesis. I'm going to start going. You've identified the problem. Now you're starting to build it for success. One of the things I absolutely loved about your approach is it's systematic. And it's, I believe, based on your years of doing this, where it's like, all right, I did it the sloppy way. I A/B tested it all day, every day for years. And here's what works for you in the Amazon environment, but I think it would work in almost every company to have that level of rigor. So talk a little bit about maybe that first month. You identify a project, you found a helper, you notified your boss, and they've given the blessing or buy-in, like, yep, okay, devote some of your time to that. How would you structure that first month for somebody as they have their document or they have their draft? What do they do next?
Yeah. So let's touch on that point one more time. The first thing to do is actually writing out that project charter, right? And you mentioned it, but like, we shouldn't really brush off on that. It's the most important part of the entire project, is making sure that your understanding and your strategic appreciation of what the problem might be is the right one. So that's when you go through a iterative process where you ask for inputs and feedback from others that actually might know different parts of the story, so that you can sort of try and have as a comprehensive understanding of the problem as possible. Say you have that charter, which could be a list of bullet points, could be a table, could be an actual charter document. In a book, I usually provide, I obviously provide the way I've grown up with, or the way of doing things at Amazon. But there's many other ways. Now, once that's done, you really need to get going, right? That's when sort of the second challenge comes in. It's like, okay, fine, I've done all this research, everything's laid out. Now what do I do? Now, there are different ways. From experience, you could have to potentially do a pilot. It obviously depends on the type of project or issue that you are trying to fix. But say, for instance, if we go back to what we were saying earlier, you need to address customer retention, right? You might have 2 or 3 ideas to do that. Hopefully, that's the output of your charter document in your investigation phase. What do you do with those 2, 3, 4, 10 ideas? You probably need to test them, right? There will be one that will work better than the other. A few might not be feasible. And so unless you only have one option to really go for, you put together a pilot. That in itself is a completely separate sort of path or branch of your program or project that requires its own structure, its own rigor, its own sort of steps to go through. But you want to A/B test your assumption. So my suggestion is, you always want to run some sort of test. It's a pilot, A/B, whatever the case is, just to make sure that you are on the right path. Once you've got that certainty, then you should be in a position to scale things up, right? So the pilots demonstrated that option 1 and 3 are the right ones. Okay, fine. Now we probably have to roll them out. Say you test it on a smaller scale, maybe only one geography, your company is global, so you want to roll things out. Then you go through the motions of actually scaling your learnings and making sure that the project or program almost comes to an end, right? Which is actually another crucial part, because a program never comes to an end. And that's where we often fail, which is sort of the closing the loop and making sure that we have a flywheel that sort of perpetuates, right, and sustains itself, so that whatever you did on a pilot scale and then scaled up can continue to live on its own even after you're gone. And I'll just use another 30 seconds to give you an alternative scenario, which is when you don't really need to pilot. Say, for instance, one of the programs I wanted to stand up was something to help my company develop its talent, right? So we have, say, 1,000 people. We've never really been very intentional with developing the talent we have. So we need to put together a set of initiatives that will do that. I don't really need to test things as much or pilot things. I might still have to pilot a few things, but like, say, for instance, I would want to do, build a repository of trainings. And then I will want to build a program that allows people to role serve, right? Go from one team to another for like 2 weeks and then go back, whatever. I can pilot those things, especially the most critical ones, the ones where I might have some issues. But I don't necessarily need to pilot building a repository of trainings, right? So I just go do it. But again, where sort of the next crucial part in that is measuring success, measuring that things actually working out, and making sure that you close the loop on whatever problem statement you set out at the beginning. So there are different alternatives depending on the problem. But yeah, that's usually the steps one should go through if they wanted some rigor and some structure.
Yeah, one of the things I love that you call out too, in thinking about the rigor of when you're setting it up like an experiment. I did a podcast earlier this year about thinking about the scientific method of, well,
Yeah.
how long should I test this thing? And sometimes you call it out in your book, I'm going to test it until I'm right. Or I tested it for too short. I was impatient, cut it. And I think that does also tie back if it's an expensive thing to test, which maybe you've been ambitious in structuring your charter. Hey, I'm going to roll it out to half of our user base or half of our customers. Well, maybe you're going too aggressively. Picking, hey, I have this hypothesis, maybe it impacts one geo, one segment of the business. Well, let's test it there. And does it necessarily connect that what works for a small business in EMEA would translate to medium-sized companies in APAC? Maybe, maybe not. And so there are a lot of global issues at play there. But whatever it might be, however you structure it, I love that point you made of either holding on for too long, where like, ooh, kind of a little bit different than what you started with of staying in a role for too long. But if you hold on to a project for too long until you're correct versus, oh, hey, I'm going to test this in a week. And you get into the finer points of A/B testing versus a pilot. And these are kind of minutia things. The big theme I took from it was having a meaty thing that you can dig into. Because like you said, hey, if it's just building videos and articles for people for professional development, checkbox, it's done. Well, I can check NPS, I could get thumbs up, thumbs down feedback from people, but the lift was relatively light to get those things stood up versus, hey, I'm going to change this process or tinker with it a little bit. Okay, well then you could stand it up pretty quickly, but did it work or not? It has bigger ramifications than just, checkbox, I did the thing.
Yeah, 100%. And just to add one thing there, like, again, it goes back to having rigor and an intentional process that you follow, even when you test things. Like, you should have goals. You should have what good looks like. You should have a fallback plan. You should have a timeline. And then sort of as you move along, hopefully someone will ask you and hold you accountable for decisions that you're making and hopefully help you course correct where needed or potentially call it short where it is necessary to continue piloting. And yeah, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all type of approach, unfortunately. So definitely apply judgment and try to be right along. I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and I think the other component that I always heard, but then I never, or I've yet in my life, fully accepted the notion of failure is okay. And so it's easy to think of like, oh, well, like if the thing bombs, so be it. You learn from it. As much as I failed on plenty of things, there's still something in my gut, maybe for you or maybe for other listeners, maybe I just haven't failed enough to embrace it of like try to mess up stuff royally.
I love that point, Andrew. Like, if you let me indulge in that for like 30 seconds,
sure.
It's actually, I don't think that you haven't failed enough or that, like, it's never about you. It's the company in which you work that is not empowering you to fail. And be proud of the failure because it taught you something that, especially if you failed during a pilot, it saved you money, resources, time from failing at a much bigger scale. And so the pilots that I've seen my team do, like over the years, myself, like, and even stakeholders around me, some of the most effective and useful pilots were the ones that failed. Genuinely. And I have plenty of examples. Like, I can't go through all the details, but like, it's as good of an outcome, the failure of a pilot, as it is the success of the pilot.
Yeah.
We just need to accept that. If a manager comes back to you and says, well, Andrew, the pilot you ran failed, and therefore you failed, they're not the right leader to work for.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, like, their company, their team, whatever they lead, will never really become great or exceed the standards or the bar because of this mentality, which inevitably hinders progress and experimentation. So if there is one thing that the listeners should take away, and if anyone has problems with that or wants to talk more about it, do reach out to me because I'm really passionate about it. If you are a manager, encourage people under you and around you to try and fail things, but give them the tools to learn from it, obviously. Like, that's equally important. That's the most important part, right? We can't just fail for the sake of failing. We need to learn, from the sake of failing. We need to learn from it. We need to learn from it and sort of move on and add to the toolkit.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. And one thing that kind of sprung to mind too, in connecting the dots for what you shared about the example of professional development components. I think for the times that I managed others, think about performance reviews, one-on-ones. Very often, what is the topic of conversation? What did you succeed at? Tell me about your wins. Let's celebrate your wins, all the good things that happened, versus normalizing to a degree. Hey, what was your failure? What didn't go as you hoped or as you planned or as you hypothesized? So to make space for that component too would be great to think about 100%. In those for HR people if they're listening. Hey, your quarterly or your year-end review, as much as like, oh, let me write paragraphs and novels about how great I am as an individual. In a non-shameful way, how can you make space for, here are the things that I fudged up, and here's what I learned from it. Make it normal, and then embrace it. All right. I think that's a good note for us to wrap up on, hopefully empowering people to take risks, fail, succeed. Hopefully you're not going to win all of them, but then if nothing else, to learn from those mistakes. And so some pieces that, as we recap, we talked about the sequence of how do you structure a project or a program. We use those terms interchangeably. Your book delineates the difference between them, but for the layman out there,
it's fine.
The same until you read the book. Then it'll all become clear. Huge steps. We're talking to people, finding an outlier in data, finding a helper or buy-in from a manager or some other sponsor within your team, within your company. It could also be outside. You mentioned the upside for mentors. If you don't have a mentor within your company, there are tons of tools and avenues to find one external. Sometimes I found that super valuable because they're not in the bubble that is your company. They don't know the terms, they don't know the politics, whatever that might be. So those are the three big steps on identifying a project or a program to sink your teeth into. And then Fed also outlined the other steps there of how you build your charter. That's the most important step as you identify after that walk and talk to the people. You've identified the problem, then you build a charter. That's the critical step. You can do a pilot, all sorts of things. It's all outlined in the book. Run a test, analyze the results, scale. And then other huge piece, a program never ends, unlike this podcast, which will end shortly due to the limits of time. But a well-structured program can fail, it can succeed, but ideally the actions might change within that program. But you're constantly iterating and tinkering to try and drive either more efficiency, more revenue, whatever the thing is, the lever that you're trying to increase or the metric that you're trying to increase. All right, so last step, Fed, for people, if they want to get to know you a bit more beyond this podcast, get in touch with you, where should they go?
LinkedIn is the place to go. Just reach out to me there. I try to share my 2 cents every now and then. I don't think I've gotten to the point of defining myself as a influencer. Actually, not even trying to do that. But I tend to post some of the learnings, some of my observations every now and then. So yeah, why not? Get along the journey. And my book is on Amazon, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. I was going to say, I was like, we couldn't talk about I don't think we would have been able to have this podcast if you didn't mention Flywheel once. And we got just the one, two mentions.
Oh, I did? I did.
Just once.
I did.
So I think if that was on your growth goals, but it was good. It was aptly put. All right, I will put links in the show description for all the things, for the book, how to connect with Fed on LinkedIn, as well as some other topics for you to continue your journey about program and product management. Thank you, Fed. Appreciate you joining for today. Always a spirited conversation. Glad we're reading the same books. And enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks to everybody for listening. And enjoy the next program, whatever it might be.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. It was really fun. Appreciate it.